This meeting of the State of Rhode Island Board of Elections will come to order. It is Tuesday, October 3rd. It is 2:02 p.m. Madam Secretary, please roll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chairwoman Maderas.
Here.
Chairman Scholes.
Present.
Member Bettenker.
Here.
Member Connors. Member DeSimone.
Present.
Member Jack Boney.
Present.
Member Johnson.
Present.
Executive Director Robert Raposa.
Present.
Legal Counsel Raymond Garchell.
Present.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. First item on today's agenda. The board may vote to meet in executive session pursuant to Rhode Island General Laws 4246(5) subsection A4 and 1725(5) subsection A7I to discuss and/or vote on possible violations of the campaign finance laws in two campaign finance matters. Do we have a motion to go into closed session for that purpose? Moved by Mrs. Johnson. Do we have a second? Seconded by Vice Chair Scholes. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, unanimous vote of the board. And item number 2, the board may vote to meet in executive session on a personnel matter pursuant to Rhode Island General Laws 4246(5) subsection AL. Do we have a motion? We have a motion by the Vice Chair. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Bettenker to go into closed session for the purpose cited. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, it's unanimous vote. So we will go into closed session at 2:03 p.m. And seal the minutes of the executive session.
So moved.
Moved by Vice Chair Scholes. We have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. DeSimone. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are back in session at 3:58 PM. Mr. Mercatio, can we hear from you?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. There is one matter to report out in open session from the executive session. It involves a campaign finance investigation conducted by the Campaign Finance Department or Division with Mr. Thornton regarding Lacey McGreevy and her campaign finance reports or failure to provide reports and records. After discussion, the board voted to refer the matter out for civil action to be filed in Providence County Superior Court. The motion was made by Vice Chair Scholes, seconded by Mr. DeSimone. All 6 members who are present voted in favor, none opposed. There were no other matters to report out in open session.
Thank you, Mr. Mercatio. We are on item number 3. The board may discuss and vote to approve the minutes of the meeting of Tuesday, September 12th, 2023. Moved by Vice Chair Scholes. We have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Bettinger. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed?
So,
You-
sorry, Madam Chair, I don't think all the meetings run into each other, but I don't believe I was here for that, so I'm going to.
You're abstaining. With one abstention, the matter's approved. Item number 4. The board may hear and consider any election matter that requires an immediate ruling or determination arising from the Coventry referendum, Cranston City Council Ward 6 election, and Foster Town Council election. And for this, I'm thinking we're going to hear from Miguel Nunez. Mr. Nunez.
Good afternoon, members of the board. I will try to be brief in my summaries. I know you had a long session just now. I just wanted to provide to you a summary of Election Day today. We're conducting elections in Cranston, Coventry, and Foster. And as of the time of this meeting, we have had no incidents or problems to report. The highlight of the morning, I think, that we had was we got a call from a candidate who was complaining that at the Schofield Armory, the National Guard Armory, that the poll workers were not repeating the name and addresses loud enough. So I figured that's the highlight of our day. That means we're having a pretty good day. I just wanted to provide to you a quick summary of the overall turnout, just so you can have a snapshot as of a couple of hours ago of what the turnout was. We had in Coventry, we had 27,702 voters, 5 polling places. We had 26 mail ballot requests. We had 177 individuals who voted early, and we had 544 as of 1 o'clock today vote at the polls on Election Day, for an average for a turnout of 3%, which that has probably increased a few percentage points at this point. Cranston has been more active. Out of the 8,912 voters that the 2 polling places encompass, we had 246 mail ballot requests, 262 Cranston residents voted early, and we had 503 vote Election Day as of a couple of hours ago. That's at 11%. That surely is a few percentages higher at this point. And then finally, Foster, they have 3,885 voters. They have 1 polling place. We had 16 mail ballot requests. We had 147 Foster residents vote early, and 107, as of a couple of hours ago, had voted at the polls for a 7% turnout. So out of the 40,499 voters encompassing today's elections in 8 polling places, we have an average turnout of 5%, but that should surely rise a few percentage points after at the close of the polls today. Next slide, Jacob. So if you can see here, so far today, we have mail ballots only encompassing 12% of the turnout, Election Day at 59%, early voting at 29%. It continues a trend that we've seen where early voting and mail ballots tend to take up about 50% of the Election Day of the voting in the election, with early voting encompassing even more because of the long 20-day period. We do expect mail ballots to increase with the online mail ballot tool being rolled out just a short while ago. And then finally, I just wanted to give you a breakdown of the mail ballots. We have received a total of 288 mail ballot requests were submitted to the local boards and approved. We have received, out of those 288 ballots, the Board of Elections has received 241 back from voters for an 84% average return rate, which is in line with what we normally do see.
Okay.
80 to 90% of voters do return their ballots, but they do have until 8 o'clock today. So this number could surely be higher. We did recently visit the main post office to do a final sweep of any ballots that may have come in at the last minute. If you have any other questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Any questions of Miguel? Okay, thank you very much for your report.
You're welcome.
We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Item number 5, the board may discuss and vote on the relocation of the polling location for the Jamestown general election for U.S. 1st Congressional District to be held on November 7th, 2023. Mr. Reposa, we'd like to hear from you.
Honorable members of the board, on September 15th, the Board of Elections staff received a letter via email from the Jamestown Board of Canvassers that they had met earlier in the day to review and discuss the polling location for the November 5th Congressional District 1 special election. They voted 2-0 to relocate the polling place from the Lawn Avenue School to the Jamestown Recreation Center. The Jamestown Board was asked by the Jamestown School Department to reconsider having their polling place at the Lawn Avenue School as school will be in session. This would alleviate any disruption to the school and to the voters. When a school is in session while voting occurs, it can create several issues, including traffic at the start and end of the day, limited parking during school hours, along with safety and security concerns. If approved by the Board of Elections, they have agreed to post signage at the Lawn Avenue School as well as Town Hall directing voters to the Jamestown Recreation Center, and will post notification in the local newspaper and on the town website. Jamestown consists of 2 regular polling locations, Precinct 1501, which is the Jamestown Recreation Center located at 41 Connecticut Avenue, and the second being Precinct 1502, which is the Lawn Avenue School, which is located at 55 Lawn Avenue. These 2 locations are 0.8 miles apart from each other, and both use a gym as the voting room. For statistical purposes, for the September 5th, 2023 primary, Jamestown turnout numbers were 522 people voted at the poll. 73 voted mail ballots, and 581 voted early voting ballots at Town Hall. We anticipate seeing slightly higher numbers for the November 7th special election, but the staff agrees with the request that has been made by the Jamestown Board of Canvassers to relocate to the Jamestown Recreation Center, which is already their second polling location. The Jamestown canvassing clerk and members of the Jamestown Board of Canvassers are present should you have any questions of them.
Do the board members have any questions of either Bob or the Jamestown canvassing folks? Okay, do we have an action that we wish to take at this time?
I will move that we approve the change to the polling place as outlined by Mr. Reposa.
Do we have a
Second.
motion? Do we have a second?
Second.
Second. Seconded by Vice Chair. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It's a unanimous vote of the board. Thank you, Bob. And thank you, Jamestown. Item number 6, the board may discuss and vote to approve the fiscal year 25 budget for submission. Mr. Reposa?
You have documents of the budget that has input from the staff, but is prepared by the budget office in your packet. I had asked that our budget analyst be present for this meeting, but he notified us early this afternoon that he had a conflict and could not attend. So, but the Board of Elections budget for 2025, which starts July 1st, 2024, and concludes on June 30th, 2025, covers the 2024 statewide primary and the statewide general election. The budget amount that has been prepared equals $6,373,559. This number includes $5,328,559, which is for the operating costs of the agency, and an additional $1,045,000 because, as you know, that during the last legislative session, the General Assembly returned the maintenance and purchase authority back to the Board of Elections. And this money, this $1 million is reflected in this budget to cover the knowing contract election system and software advocacy solution, and if needed, in the express vote.
Do you want me to wait?
Did you,
until
do
you do?
you want him to complete it? Do you want to ask the question?
Go,
Jenny?
what do you prefer?
Whatever you want.
Mrs. Johnson,
No,
go
I
ahead.
was, thank you. I was just gonna ask, is that the, that's what you're talking about is the increase in contract professional services
Yes.
to 1.3 from 300
Right.
something?
Right.
Okay.
And
And embedded in that, in addition to the machine, is advocacy solutions.
and
continuation.
And civics, which is my next paragraph.
Okay.
That's okay.
Thank you.
The 639,900 other professional services natural account after the addition of the $1,045,000 will equal $1.2 million. It encompasses the $155,000 that is currently there. This covers the cost of LHS No Inc. Advocacy Solutions, Fluent, which is our mail ballot contract we have with the mail ballot processing machine, risk limiting audits, and the ES&S contract for maintenance of the DS200 voting machines, and also the express vote machines. The budget office placed the voting equipment incorrectly into line item 641300, but then they realized, and they did that because that's where the Secretary of State had that line item, to put that funding for that line item. The budget office changed that, so now that's included in the 639,900 that I just mentioned to you. This constrained budget of $6,373,589, the state requires us to prepare a constrained budget, which means they look for us to reduce our budget by 5%. The reduced budget brings the target back down to $5,026,542 as prescribed by the budget office. This represents a reduction of $118,384 below the current service level, again, taking the 5%. This does not include, when they do the constrained budget, it does not include fixed costs, which include salaries, election expenses, purchase and maintenance of voting equipment, lease quarters for the headquarters here located at 2000 Plainfield Pike, and also for do-it charges. It should be noted that while we are required to submit a constrained budget, the General Assembly has always looked very favorable on the function of the Board of Elections, and they acknowledge what we do here. If there are no other questions of me, I would ask that you approve this budget that goes into effect July 1st, 2024.
Board members have any questions?
I do, and I don't know if you clarified it. The director mentioned security services. In the description, you have security cameras at all drop boxes in cities and towns throughout Rhode Island. So it's a doubling of it. I see the current service level and the agency request. How come I just wanted a clarification of why it's such a big difference.
What was that line item number? if I
It
could
is
ask?
639,500 security services on page 2.
Is it the number of
It
elections?
is. So we have asked for $10,000.
Yeah.
For that.
Mhm.
The budget office has put in 5,550,
Mhm.
which is a reduction between the difference of 80%. But when we go for our budget hearing, which happens in the spring, we will address that we need that money.
Yeah, no, and I hear you and I appreciate that. I guess I was just asking if there's an explanation of why they think it should be 5. I don't know if that's something, it's one of the most dramatic differences I saw. No, okay, thank you.
And I do want you to realize, the Board of Elections is a one-line item agency.
Yeah.
So we pull from wherever we need to pay the bill.
Thank you.
Understood. Any other questions?
I have one
Yes.
question. If I've indicated the constrained budget will result in a reduction of 118,000
Mhm.
out of certain parts of the budget, and you indicated certain parts that were exempted from that 5% reduction. So where's the 118 come from? Specifically, what items?
The 118 comes from, it comes from the Internal Services Fund, anticipated election expenses, voting equipment. Comes from that line, those areas. Because again, a lot of our costs are fixed. We have no option but to pay what we have a benefit for.
And at the hearing, you, despite what this budget has, you could present, ask the legislature to increase the amount.
We can. And we do.
Any other questions? Mr. Jack Foley.
I have just a general, I was looking at the paper, the budget, not the one that you provided today, but what you sent us in email, Bob. There's a lot of line items that says 2023 actual 0. I'm just curious, this seems like a fair number, like longevity pay and seasonal salaries, payroll accrual, Medicare, FICA. How are those 0 for the current year?
So those that are salary based, we do not have any input in that because that is done by personnel and the Office of Budget.
So they tell you what the actuals are too?
They do, because they give us they give us the money to pay the salaries and the benefits, vacation time, everything, medical coverage, that's all controlled by them. We have no input into that. The only input we have into when we're making payments would be an example of could be postage and postal services. We have a budget of 35,000. We paid last time in 2023, 13,666, because those are payments that we actually make.
Okay.
Just like the rent on this facility, the electric, the gas, telephones, those are all payments that are generated from this office.
So what about things like waste disposal? This is page 2, or it says page 20 on the copy I have. Maintenance, repairs, staff uniforms, food, that's all 0.
Because it's paid under expense. Because again, we're a one-line item agency, so when we go to pay, it doesn't necessarily fall into the bucket, but we have the money because it has been allocated.
So there were actual charges under those line items you're telling me, but They don't
They're-
allocate it there?
They would be allocated into the expense column,
The expense column,
the expense line item.
which is where?
$643,700.
Thank you.
I do also would like to point out that for this year,
Ah.
see it?
Yep.
This one maybe is expensive.
So
Oh, wow.
Interesting.
That just seems not great for us to be able to review it. I'll accept that.
I agree.
That's-
I agree.
Um,
And one other line item I do want to bring to your attention, I know I have mentioned this to you in the past, that the staff has recognized that since 1997, we had one company that moved our voting equipment to and from the polling places in prior and post-election, that in 2023, our charges, oh, it's not listed there, but, hold on one second. Do you know the line item for express delivery?
643,420,
643,
420, the bottom of the second page.
so that line item, that payment is based on one vendor. We are realizing that due to the importance and security of elections, when we prepare an RFP, which will occur in January of 2024, the RFP is actually going to be looking for 4 vendors for 4 different districts in the state, so that we have multiple moving companies moving our voting equipment, so that we're not tied into just one vendor. So, but because of that, the line item had to be increased.
That was actually my next question. Sorry about
No,
that.
go ahead.
Because it's a pretty substantial increase. It's like over 300%. So You're
It is a
anticipating-
massive increase. We're expecting that. And the reason being is that the contractor that has the contract now has been moving voting equipment since before I came to work here in 1997, has been the primary mover of equipment since 1998. And it has a very unique way on how it happens. But every year, 3 years when we go out to bid, he always comes in the lowest. But now that we feel we need more, we are anticipating, and that's why it's reflected in this budget, that the cost is going to escalate.
That much? Is that based on market research?
It's based on bids, responses that we received in the past.
Bob, isn't that also because the vendor, Morgan, is retiring, no longer in business?
He is interested in maybe keeping one zone. He does not want the entire state. But he was here this morning, we were talking, he is interested in maintaining possibly one zone.
Okay. Any other questions?
Sorry, a few more. Under the do it, the IT section, looks like we've accrued expenses, but we've got zeros for the request. Is there a reason for that? And I have a related follow-up question.
What was the number on that?
It starts at 647,901 and then all the way down through 925.
Those again are figures that are controlled by the state. They are not controlled by us.
So do we have money allocated for these sections?
They will be allocated. It has not shown up yet in this.
Okay.
And again, this document is prepared by the Office of Budget, Management Budget.
So do you anticipate the bottom line number to increase or is it hidden somewhere else?
It may increase.
Okay. All right, one final question, I guess, related to that, which I think is probably the same answer, is under computer equipment, 661711. Actuals is 0. We requested 700,000. The state has said 0.
Now, that's a mistake on the budget office.
Okay.
So we put in that we felt that at some point, we may need to purchase new poll pads because, as you know, that we took over the purchase of voting equipment. So we requested 700,000, the state took it out because they felt that it should be part of that number I mentioned to you earlier, the $1,045,000. So it's embedded in there, but that's why there is a zero in that column.
But it's accounted for.
It's accounted for.
So just from a procedural perspective, do we get an updated budget at some point that we vote on again, or?
No,
what do you
this
know?
is the budget. You vote on this, it then goes before the Budget Review Committee in the spring and then ultimately approved by the governor.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I guess to add to, I'm sorry, to that point, I wonder if the commissioner, would it be helpful, Commissioner, if you saw, because that's true, it makes sense. If after the budget is passed, do you want to see, like, if the line items are being able to be fed? Because the director said, thank you. Yeah, I think maybe that would be helpful
We
for the
will get
commissioner.
anything that changes, we will receive copies of.
Okay.
And you'll provide them to the board.
I will.
Excellent. Yes, Mr. Dismal?
Just the 700,000 again, because that was my question, Bob. So that's an estimate just for pole pads,
That was.
and you said that's contained in the million?
It is. We had thought we were going to have to buy all new pole pads, so we put it in. We realized since then that we do not need to replace all the pole pads.
Okay,
But then that money was then put into the, hold on one second. It was put into the decision package where the $1,045,000 resides.
okay, so is 700,000 of that 1 million?
That 1 million includes what we feel we need to buy.
The new
new
number you
pole-
need.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Okay. Any other
Thank you, Bob.
questions? Okay, do we have a motion at this point to approve the budget as submitted? Moved by the vice chair. Do we have a second? Seconded by Ms. Bettencourt. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It's unanimous vote of the board. Item number 7. The board may discuss and vote on the local election official certification and training program for the 2024 election cycle. And for this, we'll hear from Miguel Nunez, our Deputy Director of Elections. And I know that Mr. Rock will probably want to comment as well. So if you'd like to come up, sir. Mr. Rob Rock, the Deputy Secretary of State.
Madam
Miguel?
Chair, if I could also request that Mr. Lima also join, because he was part of preparing this as well.
Okay, sure. Sir Nicholas Leamer, he's with the Cranston Canvassing, the election official. We'll start with you, Miguel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Rob Rock, Deputy Secretary of State, forwarded this document that you have before you for the training certification of Rhode Island election officials on September 14th to myself, and I did share that with my staff, and I responded to Mr. Rock the same day after my review that I agreed with the proposal. It essentially breaks down what we currently do in aggregated training for our local boards, and the Secretary of State's office as well does with the central voter registration system into 12 different modules. And I thought that was a good way to actually package the information and into a way that could be absorbed more readily by the local boards, and to break it up. 5 of those modules, of those 12, of those 13 modules, excuse me, would be directly impact the board staff. However, there are a couple of other ones that are more in line with recent trends in elections, such as some of the psychological and components of election officials have had to endure over the past 4 years, almost 4 years since the 2020 election and since 2016. So those are modules that I think that we've learned, and as our participation with the National Association of Election Directors, that are other election officials in other states are having to deal with. So we thought those were a great idea as well. I did have questions for Mr. Rock about the logistics of conducting this, especially moving into a busy 2024 presidential year. And if it would be virtual, if it would be in person. If there would be a tracking system built into the central voter registration system to track this, if we're going to be issuing a certification to local officials, that would be something that they would refer back to, and they would have to be properly recorded. And in terms of it building the curriculum out, if there was any engagement with any educators or perhaps from the Community College of Rhode Island College, for example, that could help build out the curriculum. Those were all questions that Mr. Rock thought were great that we could be worked out. And as we build this program, but the staff, I will say, was very pleased with the proposal, and we think it's a great idea and it has our support.
When would be the time that would, once this is finalized, when it would commence?
I'm going to defer it to Rob, so he can
Okay.
give you some of the details on that.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you, Miguel.
Thanks, Chairwoman and members of the board. I think, just before I answer that question, Chairman, if it's okay, I want to, I know that the secretary met with all of the board members individually when he first got elected, and for those who just got appointed more recently, and one of the conversations that the secretary had with Commissioner Jack Foney was this certification program. So I want to thank the commissioner for helping spearhead this along with Nick. We also, not only did we send it to the board and Miguel shared it with the staff, we also sent it to the Elections Committee of the Clerks Association, who all responded positively,
Great.
sent some feedback, but all responded positively, which we're really happy about. And then we actually visited the Jamestown Board of Canvassers at their request, and I know most of them are behind me, and they, while it didn't take a formal vote, certainly supported the idea. So we have gotten broad positivity when it comes to this program. And Chairwoman, to your question directly, I think that it really already has commenced in my estimation. I know that one of the modules we all agree on is the cybersecurity piece. That's really, really important. And just last Friday, and some of you were there and we appreciate your attendance, Kathy Placencia put on a great cybersecurity summit. We also held, thanks to the board in this very room, the National Tabletop to Vote exercise that the federal government puts on every year. And I think that folks, our local election officials should get credit for attending those, even though this program has not fully been implemented. So I think that over the course of the normal election cycle, a lot of these modules are already in place. We do training on the central voter registration system. We do training on how to operate, the presidential preference primary, the state primary, and the general when it comes to the administrative side. The board does all of their work on trainings with the DS200s, the poll pads, and all of that. So this program, I'd say, is really already in effect. I think it's just a more formal piece. And so I think that once and if the board does support this and working together to come up with the content, which I think is probably 75, 80% already complete, it would just commence as we enter in the 2024 election cycle. As an example, presidential candidates for the Rhode Island presidential primary file at the end of the year, December 28th through 30th. So because the local boards will be processing not declarations, but the signatures and the mail ballots, we're going to have training normally, probably mid-December, just normally because of the presidential primary. So I think with all of this in place by then, we can start tracking, as Miguel pointed out. We want to make sure, and I think the whole point that the secretary had, and when we were talking about this, is that to give something to the local election officials to say, here, you're certified. You're a certified local election official. You've taken all of the classes. And I think that's really important. One, because it's great for a resume, but also it's really great that all of our locals are trained. So I think that it's already started, but I think that once we formalize this and start checking the boxes when every canvasser has taken these courses and give them a certificate, I think that's really going to be important.
Excellent. I was actually going to ask the question, and I'd like to ask it of Mr. Lima. I know that you're in close contact with the local boards, being part of that group. Did you meet any resistance at all, or was it all positive? Because I know they're crazy busy right now. So
Thank you,
will
Madam
be.
Chair, members of the board. Absolutely, it was very positive. I didn't really get any negative feedback from the Elections Committee. And we also spoke about this briefly at the last quarterly Clerks Association meeting, which actually was right down the street on Atwood Ave in Cranston a couple of weeks back. And it's been very positive so far. I think election officials look at this as a way to better professionalize the work that we all do. I mean, a lot of these things are obviously things that the vast majority of clerks know very well, could probably teach some of these courses, but it's good to give everybody on the same page, everyone a refresher, especially as new clerks cycle in, clerks retire or move on. It's good to have a bit of uniformity and standardization amongst various processes. I'll put things on my local election certificate when we certify the election that another town might not. Another town might put things on their election warrant that, we don't or should in
That's true.
Cranston. Those sorts of processes are ones that are not greatly defined by state law, but they should be well defined on a policy level and on a training level, so there's uniformity. And I think this program is a great way to do that. It really just, I think, expands upon what we already do with our trainings that are provided by the BOE and Secretary of State, and adds a couple of new layers to that can be built up over time. It's not something I think that's going to be immediate and right away. Across the board, there are portions of it that I think have an immediate positive impact. But I think over time, it's going to help us, I think, match some similar programs that already exist in other states. The Clerks Association nominated myself along with the Portsmouth Registrar, Jackie Schultz, to the Local Leadership Council of the Federal Election Assistance Commission. We had our first in-person meeting of that new body this summer. And one big takeaway that we both had from attending that was that many other states have similar programs that they benefit greatly from for their locals, designed specifically for county clerks, city clerks, and township clerks in other states. So kind of modeling off of what they already do successfully and establishing that here, I think it's going to be great for Rhode Island elections.
Terrific. Well, and I'm just pleased that it kind of strengthens the partnerships that we all have, the board and the Secretary of State and the local canvassing people. So I think it's great. And I think that if we can accomplish this, I think it's wonderful. Anybody have any questions of any of the, Mr. Schultz, go ahead.
Yeah, a couple of questions. Yeah, Bob, do you envision that the members of the Board of Canvassers would be attending these classes in addition to the clerks themselves?
I think it'd be great. I think that there's a lot that can be learned from the board members. There are different varying levels of board participation across the state. Some are very hands-on, some are contacted when the canvasser calls them, but I think that it would certainly be open to anyone willing to participate.
Right. And Miguel brought up an issue here, and that's whether or not these classes will be conducted in person or virtual or a combination. What are your thoughts on that?
I would say the latter, the combination. I think that we now, in the day and age that we live in now with the Zoom and Teams and all of that, we can not only conduct the trainings virtually, but we can also record them. And I think that that's really important. For example, the CVRS basics, I'll just point that out. That's just the normal day-to-day work on registering a voter and changing a party affiliation. If we record that and it's an hour seminar, as soon as someone gets hired, they can sit at their desk and they can watch the video. They don't need to have an in-person training. There are some, like the cybersecurity stuff, the tabletop to vote stuff, that I think in person would make more sense. And I think as time goes on, we can probably develop a cadence with whether or not they're going to be in person or virtual. But my guess is that they'll be offered both and they'll be filmed. And that way people can look at a library of modules that they can review, as they see fit.
So I take it there will be some training materials
Of
that will be
course.
distributed.
Yes. And I think that, I don't want to speak for the board, but I know from the CVRS perspective, we have training manuals already that we provide when we do trainings. And I know the board has them as well. So the written materials will always be available.
Right. I think it's an important concept. Professionalizes the administration of the elections. So congratulate you and your team for putting this together.
Yes.
Miguel and Nick, thank you very much.
It's excellent. Marcella, you had a question?
Yes, my question, and thank you for asking that. That was really helpful. And you mentioned that this could be something that a person takes right upon when they are hired. I guess I have two questions. One, do we know the total amount of hours that it would take to take all these certifications? That's one question. And the other one, will we add some type of requirement of within what time frame after being hired or after this is sort of passed, will we require clerks to complete this?
Yeah, I think to the second question first, I think it'll depend on the training. So I think that when we provide, when someone gets hired, for example, they have to apply with our office for one of those multi-factor authentication YubiKeys to gain access to the system. And so I can see us implementing a policy where we wouldn't provide a YubiKey unless they've taken the training. I'm not sure we can do that with every module because there are certain things that'll happen over the course of time. But I do think we should make this as mandatory as possible. I know that's kind of an odd phrase, but I think that you don't get certified unless you've taken all of the questions. So go ahead, Nick.
And I think a good example to compare this to, and I think the chairman would be familiar, is the current system that we have for clerks. Under the IMC, you can be a certified municipal clerk, a master municipal clerk, CMC, MMC. Most of the clerks in the state or participants in the Town Clerks Association go through that program. It's a multi-year program. It takes a while to go through every class. But the focus of that isn't really on elections, it's on probate court and other clerks' functions and open records and other tasks that are mostly assigned to the clerk's office and not necessarily the election component. Whereas this election official designation, as Rob said, I think there are certain modules that make sense. Before you undertake signature validation, you'd want the clerk to go through that training module, but there are other modules that can happen over time, I think be built up and to add to the professional development for each election official individually.
And I think I'd like to also add that Rob, Kathy, and I also had the privilege of sitting through a presentation from Washington State and Colorado, who have similar certification programs, and they found that they didn't really even have to make it mandatory. They basically made it as this kind of is my my authentication that I'm a certified election official. I went through all these courses, so it sort of makes it a privilege to have it, and people will just do it because it looks good on their resume
I'm
for
not
their
surprised.
professional careers.
Sure.
And admittedly, Commissioner, I don't remember your first question.
Okay, that should have like.
The hours.
I wrote it down, yes, a total amount of hours that
Oh,
this would take.
That's a good, I think that, I don't have an answer, but I think one of
That's
the
okay.
best parts about these trainings are the questions that get asked after the training happens. And I think that's why recording them and getting the questions so that people can hear the answers to them. I think the trainings themselves, I could see them lasting an hour or so, but they always extend because of really good questions. So, and as time goes on, we'll implement the answers to those questions in the next version of the training. So I do see this as a kind of a fluid system where we're going to continue to revamp the trainings and all of that as time goes on.
Yes.
And I think to add to that too, I think the advantage of a system like this versus the Clerks Association trainings are kind of rigid. They're standardized across multiple states, whereas since this is state run, there is more fluidity there to work with. And there's multiple opportunities to grow and develop and change the system over time, and to adapt it based on feedback from the clerks themselves as they go through these certifications. And I think the best advantage of it all is that because it's being run by the Secretary of State and Board of Elections, there's no charge for the clerks, there's no charge for municipalities, it's free for them. So there is a cost on the clerk side for the CMC and MMC designations.
indeed.
They have to attend out-of-state seminars. Same for some of the National Association election official certification programs. There's significant cost related to those. And in this case, really, there's no excuse not to do it.
It's a very good point. Thank you. Any other questions?
I have a question. I have a statement, not more a question. Just a suggestion, I think, to us as a board and maybe even Secretary of State's office, because I think this is a wonderful, you mentioned it earlier, it's a wonderful example of how we can cooperate together. So I'm wondering if upon, when these things first start, I think that it's important to put this in the media. I think it's really important to showcase that our agencies work really well together and that, that our clerks at the local level are getting as much support and excellence as possible. That would be really great.
I think that's a great suggestion. I also think it wouldn't be a bad idea for us to kind of partake in some of these and take a look at them. I think it would
I
be
would love that.
very interesting for us to see. I mean, I understand, but some folks don't know on the local level just what it is to be a canvassing clerk. So thank you very, very much. Do we have a motion by the board to endorse this?
Yes, I move that we endorse and support and implement the proposed training and certification program as presented today.
Very
I'll
good.
second that.
Seconded by Mr. Jack Boney. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. And thank you, Mr. Jack Boney, as well, for your input on this. Okay, we're on item number 8. Moving right along here. The board may discuss and vote to begin the process of rulemaking with its review of a regulation that will allow the reduction of campaign finance fines and penalties called the Campaign Finance Accounts Receivable Reduction and Suspension Regulation. Rolls off the tongue. We'll hear from you, Mr. Thornton.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. Before I start speaking about the specific regulation, I want to start with some background, provide you with some context how we got here. Starting in the year 2002, the state statute required that fines and potentially fees would be assessed for late filing or non-filing of campaign finance reports. The fine is $25 for a late or non-filed report. For non-filed reports, if a filer does not file a report in response to a certified letter that is mailed to them, then there's a $2 fee that's added to the $25 and continues to accrue at $2 per day until the report is filed. Okay, during the course of an election period, there are multiple reports that are required to be filed. During a non-election year, there are quarterly reports. So if a filer fails to file multiple reports, the fines can accelerate pretty quickly. We recognize that the $2 fee accrual would greatly inflate the fines over time. So in 2003, the board initiated an amnesty program whereby if the filers who were delinquent on their reports and had not filed reports agreed to become compliant and file their reports within 3 weeks of receiving notification, the board would waive the accrued daily fees, and the filer would be obligated for just the $25 base fee. That program was very successful. We reached out to about 170 delinquent accounts, and again, most of them took advantage of the program. There were about a dozen that did not, and the board initiated legal action in Superior Court to collect those fines. And on those matters, the board, such legal action as placing liens on property, garnishing wages, and activities of that sort were also used in Superior Court.
And excuse me, Greg, you said that was 2000?
That was 2003, the
Okay,
amnesty
thank you.
program. Basically overlapped into 2004 as well. 2006, again, each election cycle, there are more candidates declaring, means our base of filers increase as well. 2006, there was obviously still an issue with some of the debt that was unpaid by filers. So the board voted to refer about 12 cases over to the Office of Attorney General for further investigation and collection there. No action was taken on any of those cases, and the board ultimately ended up taking back and handling those matters itself. 2008 is when we began the process of trying to deal with the growing debt through legislation. Again, the $2 per day fee is set by statute. We really did not have control over that at the time. So in 2008, proposed legislation that would prohibit a candidate or committee who has failed to file 2 or more reports of contributions and expenditures within a calendar year from receiving any contributions until all past due reports were filed and fines paid. Again, that was not enacted. 2011 and 2012, the board again authorized legal counsel to initiate action in Superior Court for a collection of about 12 candidates altogether. We had success there as well. In 2013, legal counsel presented a legal memorandum to the board regarding the imposition of campaign fines and the doctrine of proportionality. That was starting to become an issue that we are aware of, both by federal constitution, the 8th Amendment, and state constitution. There's prohibitions against imposing excessive fines. And some of the fines had accrued to a level where they were disproportionate to the violation and therefore uncollectible. From that point forward, again in 2013, introduced legislation to cap fines and prohibit long-term non-filers from accepting contributions, making expenditures, or declaring for public office until such time as a non-filer became compliant. Again, that did not proceed. 2016, again, proposed legislation to cap fines and prohibit long-term non-filers from accepting contributions, making expenditures, or declaring for public office until such time as the non-filer became compliant. Again, that went nowhere. 2017, proposed legislation to cap fines and authorize the Board of Elections to initiate civil proceedings to compel a candidate to file campaign finance reports or to refer the matter to the Attorney General for further investigation. No candidate who failed to file campaign finance reports after commencement of the civil action or referral to the AG would be allowed to appear on any state or local ballot until the matter is resolved. That did not proceed. 2018, we reintroduced that similar legislation that had been introduced in 2017. Again, it did not go anywhere. 2018, a subcommittee for campaign finance enforcement of fines was formed to develop a course of action for the campaign finance division to follow for enforcement of fines, including the use of a collection agency to recover unpaid fines. 2019, again, proposed legislation that would authorize the Board of Elections to prohibit the raising or spending of campaign funds unless a person fully complies with the reporting requirements. That didn't go anywhere. 2019, the board contracted with the Rhode Island Department of Revenue Central Collections Unit to assist with the collection of debt. Part of the provision in the memorandum of understanding is that the debt has to be valid. Again, we're still left with the issue of proportionality. 2018 and 2019, we began campaign finance through board's authorization, began to issue subpoenas to non-filers to increase compliance. Many of those that responded resulted in appeals that went before the board, and others were referred to the CCU for collection. 2020, I drafted legislation again that would cap fines, but I did not submit it for consideration due to previous failed attempts. A decision was made to pursue the matter via a regulation. Between 2021 and 2022, I drafted the current proposed regulation that's before you today. Just for some perspective, some of the proactive things we do for candidates to try to get them to comply. Every time a candidate declares, they declare at the Board of Canvassers. There are informational packets that are provided to the boards of canvassers that the candidates sign acknowledging their receipt. Within those packets, there's as much campaign finance information as you can imagine, including reporting schedules and instances of what would happen if they don't comply. We also have training, both in-house training and via Zoom, to educate candidates on their campaign finance obligations. We send reminder to file notices by first-class mail to every candidate and committee. And then we follow that up. That occurs before the filing deadline, well before. And then we follow that up with multiple emails starting a month before the report due date and going up to and including the day the report is due. So there's usually 5 or 6 emails that go out. Our non-compliance for filers who either file late or don't file, at one point it was about 25% of all the filers. We are now down just below 10% on any given reporting period. So while I don't expect that debt will ever go away, because for any reporting period there will be a universe of candidates and committees that file late, I believe we really have a much better handle on the new debt getting to the disproportionate level. The current, as of the end of September of 2023, the total number of debtors for outstanding fines and fees is 170. There's a total debt of $6,089,216. Of the 170 total debtors, 24 of them owe an aggregate of $5,644,809, or nearly 93% of the total debt owed to the Board of Elections. There are currently 1,027 active candidates and committees with ongoing campaigns that are required to file quarterly reports. During an election year, the number of campaigns increased to about 1,600 to 1,700 that also include pre-primary, post-primary, pre-election, and post-election reports, required from filers participating in the election, as well as the ongoing quarterly reports for candidates who are not in an election but still have active accounts with the board. The ability to assess fines and fees has been in existence for 22 years now. Given the number of debtors during that period of time, the 24 debtors that owe the disproportionate amount of debt is less than 1% of the total debtors. So again, I see this issue as being somewhat finite. And with consideration of this regulation, I think it will go a long way of bringing that top tier of debt down to proportionate level that will then make it collectible. And we can be done with it. I will, unless you have any questions, I'll summarize what the 4 real talking points of the regulation.
Anyone have any questions at this point of Mr. Thornton? Okay, go ahead.
Okay. The regulation proposes that, essentially there's 4 buckets, really, as I looked at our debt and what it consisted of. There's 4 common scenarios. One would address filers who have registered with the board as a candidate for public office, so they filed their notice of organization, but either never followed through, didn't file a declaration of candidacy, or they didn't qualify for placement on the ballot. And the campaign finance contributions and/or expenditures do not exceed $1,000 during the election cycle. So the proposal would be to reduce the fine, whatever has accrued at the time this is brought before the board, to reduce the fine to a maximum of $500 per delinquent report due through the end of the election cycle in which the filer registered with the board as a candidate for public office. The board may also vote to suspend the accrual of all remaining penalties relating to each delinquent report and also suspend the filer's campaign finance account. The second scenario is where a filer has registered as a candidate for public office with the board, filed a declaration of candidacy and qualified for placement on the ballot, but failed to file one or more campaign finance reports due within that election cycle in which the candidate declared candidacy and the account remains active with the board. The board may vote to reduce the fine to a maximum of $1,000 per delinquent report due through the second election cycle next following the election cycle in which the candidate last filed a declaration of candidacy for election to public office. The amount of any campaign fund balance, so that would be their cash balance minus any loans to their campaign, that's greater than $0, is converted to a collectible debt as well. And the board may also suspend all remaining penalties and accruals of fees and suspend the candidate's campaign finance account. The third scenario, filers who have registered as a candidate for public office, filed a declaration of candidacy and qualified for placement on the ballot, and also filed all campaign finance reports due within the election cycle in which they were a candidate, but then failed to provide a final accounting and failed to dissolve their account with the board. So they got through the election okay, and then just ignored their account after the election. The board may vote to reduce the fine imposed to, again, a maximum of $1,000 per report that was due to be filed for 2 or more consecutive election cycles in which the filer was inactive, with no contributions received or expenditures incurred, following the election cycle in which the candidate last filed a declaration of candidacy for election to public office. Again, the amount of any campaign fund balance, which would be the cash balance minus any loans, that's greater than $0 is converted to a collectible debt. And the board may also suspend all remaining penalties and suspend the filer's campaign account. The last scenario is where a filer who has registered as a candidate for public office, filed a declaration of candidacy and qualified for placement on the ballot, and also file all campaign finance reports due with an election cycle, including a final accounting, and close their account. So essentially all their filings are compliant. All they're left with is debt for reports they file late during that period. The board may vote to reduce any outstanding penalties to a maximum of $1,000 per report that was filed past its due date. Notwithstanding those 4 scenarios, the board expressly reserves the right to modify any decision to reduce penalties or suspend a campaign finance account if any information is discovered that evidences contributions and/or expenditures that exceed the aggregate amount of $1,000 during an election cycle. In such cases, the board may convene a hearing to reconsider and modify its decision and reimpose all accrued penalties. And again, failure of these candidates to pay the reduced amount, further action of enforcement would be to refer the matter over to the Central Collections Unit for collection. So again, if you would possibly consider that, and if you have any questions, or consider that vote for start the process.
I just wanted to ask, was it something that you and our legal counsel worked together to come up with this, or did this come from?
I would say all of the formula, the best way to approach these, as he said, the buckets or the categories, that was all from Rick. I just provided the legal aspect, and of course, the whole issue of proportionality, we've been discussing that now. I've been discussing that now since that memo in 2013.
Mhm.
So this brings to fruition one way to try to reduce the runaway debt that would not be collectible for many of these people.
Understood. Yeah, when you took us down memory lane there, I can remember that 2016 on and how we've been fighting and working to try to get some legislation passed so that folks who are indebted are able to continue to run. It just doesn't make sense to me, but you had a question?
Yeah,
Mr.
actually,
DeSimone?
just for legal counsel. Ray, so is there anything in this proposal that would require a change in the, in Title 17, given the fact that I know we've tried to do this with legislation a number of years and it didn't work
Yeah.
out? Is there anything here that's going to require legislation? Is there anything here that's in conflict with the existing?
Right, so under Chapter 25, the board does have discretion already to reduce penalties. The board has been doing that. Historically has been doing it and has been doing so in many respects across the board to those who come before the board looking for reduction of the pending fines or penalties. And from my own observation, I've seen those numbers change over time. What this attempts to do is provide some uniformity to that whole process. So the board does have that discretion. It can reduce the outstanding penalties. And this seems like given that we don't have any legislation that would force the candidate to suspend campaign activity,
Mhm.
this would be another good approach to get that accomplished.
Thank you.
Any other questions of either Rick or Ray?
I just want
Yes.
to get things straight. You're proposing $1,000 maximum per report,
That's correct.
right? So if a person's owed 4 reports, it'd be $4,000. Right.
It depends on when the case is brought before the board. I mean, some of the debt that's really very disproportionate right now. If the matter were to come before the board and the fine for an individual report could be as much as $10,000, it would be reduced to $1,000. But if a fine, say it's a candidate that doesn't owe as much debt, if the fine for a report is, say, $700, it would stay at $700. It would not be a further reduction.
Okay, you indicated that 24 of the 170 debtors
Mhm.
owe approximately 93% of the debt. And I know there are some really big figures there.
Yeah.
I don't know whether or not you applied the proposed formula to those to see what would.
I did look, for instance, if the top debtor owes over $600,000. So I believe he had maybe $1,500 in his campaign account when he stopped filing. So he would fall into that bucket where he still had a balance that did not complete his filings for that election cycle. So his fines would be assessed for the balance of that election cycle and the second election cycle following. So potentially it would be closer to $10,000 plus any balance he had remaining in his campaign account, which is a collectible debt. So, but again, each one will have to be looked at individually, and each one will be brought before the board individually too, to show the amount the original amount and the amount that it's reduced to and how I got from one to the other.
Understood.
So I have a question to Ray, given what Rick has said, and if we had to try to collect that money, would that pose a problem on this question of the proportionality of fines?
Yes, depending on the activity of the candidate, him or herself, it would. In the memo, and I think what I'll do is send you, Rick has mentioned it, so I will send you for your own information that memo that I did. There was one case I remember highlighting for the board back then in 2013 where the person declared for office was delinquent in filing his reports. Ultimately, it was determined he never expended any money on his campaign. And I think the fines at the time I wrote my report were in the range of $80,000, completely out of proportion to anything. There are other people who have spent tens of thousands of dollars, have been repeated offenders, and would be proportionate depending on the number attributed to that account. The courts, going all the way up to the Supreme Court, never make this just a simple formula. They do leave the discretion to the enforcement agency so that you can calculate the offense of the person. It's not merely just the amount of money, but is it proportionate to the conduct? And courts have found in some cases that a lot of money can be owed justifiably because of the amount of, I'm thinking from the top of my head of a pilot who did not have proper credentials, did repeat like over 30 flights when was not properly certified. And he was fighting the fact that it was in the six figures for his fines. I think this was Judge Lisi who said, that's perfectly proportionate, given that you could have endangered the lives of people by not having that certification. So I think, Mr. Scholes, it's hard to say without looking at each one, but there will be cases where you could have enforced a fair amount of this, but many, many of these you could not enforce most of this because they're just running way beyond the activity of the candidates themselves.
Well, I understand the high amounts of people who have not responded over the years. We have $300,000. But if we apply the formula to those people, okay, and go back retroactive to what the fine would have been, would be under the new rule, would that be proportionate and fair?
I believe that it would be, because it would be a reduced amount that would be more in line with, for example, taking action on something that might have occurred in 2010. This would bring these numbers down more to where they would be if we had a lawsuit in that time frame.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Just one, Madam Chair. So
Yes.
we're not suggesting that the board couldn't use a number lower than what's here. This is just a fine.
Says
to a
up
maximum,
to,
correct?
that's right, maximum. You would always have the discretion. And one thought I had was that there's a lot here to, review. It might be that as you begin the process, that you, before you send it out for your public comment, you absorb it and have it for a vote at the next meeting. Or you can do so now. That's entirely in your discretion. It depends on how comfortable you are with what you have before you.
So what is the board's action they wish to take? Do we want to begin
I mean,
the
I would,
rulemaking process?
I'd move the process, the rulemaking process to submit it out to public review.
And there'll be opportunity for the board to review it anyway
Right.
in the
While the
future.
public's reviewing it, sure.
Right. So that's a motion by Mr. Di Simone. Do we have a second to Mr.?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Jack Boney.
I was just going to say that
Question?
Diane and I were on that subcommittee. We worked on this thing, and I think you've come up with a good solution.
Thank you.
So
Yeah,
thank
it's
you.
really well done.
It was actually like a eureka moment, because again, I was trying to fit the different scenarios into different buckets, and it came together nicely, but it took a long time to get there, but
Well done.
thank you.
So we have a motion and a second to begin this rulemaking process. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying
All
aye.
right.
Aye.
Those opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you again, Rick.
Thank you.
Item number 9, the board may discuss and vote to begin the process of rulemaking with its review of a draft regulation for risk limiting audits proposed to a petition submitted by Common Cause Rhode Island and verified voting. I know we're going to hear from you, Miguel, and I believe Mr. Marion, if you'd like to come up as well. So you'll be prepared to answer questions as well. Miguel, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. As some background on the risk limiting audits in Rhode Island, as you may recall, and for those who are new to the board, unless you're not aware, in 2017, Common Cause approached the board staff for support to codify in state law a post-election risk limiting audits. And the staff at the time supported it along with the board. And that was passed in the General Assembly under 1719-37.4. The board had the authority to conduct its first risk limiting audit in 2018. However, the staff and the board decided to take that time to send members of the staff to Colorado, to the state of Michigan, to observe the risk limiting audits in place in those states who had more experience with it. So essentially, myself and Steve Taylor, who, as you know, is retiring at the end of the year, and John Marion beside me, essentially had to build this set of audits from scratch in the state of Rhode Island. So in 2019, with the assistance of John, we got a bunch of academics, interested members of the public, and professionals, election officials to form a working group. And we had members of the Rhode Island College, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Verified Voting, the Brennan Center in New York. And we conducted our first pilot of risk limiting audits in January of 2019. And we were the first jurisdiction, or the first state at the time, to conduct a pilot that incorporated the three different audit methods: ballot comparison, batch comparison, and ballot polling. And we had many visitors come from out of state to observe that. And I welcome any board members who, if you're new and you're not aware of that, when that happened, we do have a video up on our YouTube channel, and we did, and the working group, John Marion with Common Cause, worked hard on getting that final report along with the staff published, which we also have available. At the time, Rhode Island would be the first, and was the first state to conduct a statewide risk limiting audit under with primarily being a polling place state, meaning that most of our votes occur at the polling place. Most of the states who have done it statewide prior to that were mail ballot only states, such as Colorado, who has been doing risk limiting audits for almost 2 decades. So the pilot was successful. We did determine what our method would be based on the valuable information that we gained from the pilot, and we did conduct 2 successful audits in 2020 during the presidential preference primary and the general election, and we did conduct successful audits in 2022 after the general election. And under 1719-37.4, the board is given the authority to enact regulations in order to implement these risk limiting audits. And on July 6th of this year, although we had discussions about it prior, John had sent me a draft of the regulations that you have before you today. I did have some feedback on the original draft, which many of those items that I pointed out, John thankfully addressed. And before you today is the draft that we had worked on together. Now, in this draft here, I had a couple of questions that I did reach out to Verified Voting, Mark Lindeman, who is our primary consultant with Verified Voting, to conduct these audits with. And I had a couple of questions about some of the terminology here in the definition section, such as the auxiliary audit stratum, and some concern that perhaps our software that we license to conduct the audit could not support such a stratum. And essentially, after my discussion with Mark and subsequently with John, we feel that the software is going to be implementing that capability. And I do support adding that capability into the rules and regulations, because it does offer a bit of sort of, if there is an issue, for example, We had an issue in Cranston in 2020 where we had a USB drive at the early voting site fail. And essentially, we had to have all of those ballots brought here to the board, and we had to rescan them through our high-speed sorters. That took those ballots out of the main audit, essentially, and we had to conduct a ballot polling audit, totally separate audit, just on that small batch of ballots. And this feature is built in here to allow us to do that if we need to, if we have another equipment failure or anything does come out of that main audit, where we can combine the results from both separate audits into a final result to meet the risk limit. And then finally, there were several sections in here that I thought should be clarified, whether or not it would be the board that would be conducting the action or the board staff. For example, under the appointment of the review boards, there is some language in here which may make it sound like the board would have to meet to actually appoint the members of the review board. Just for your, so you have perspective on what the review board is. Essentially, when we have to manually tally these ballots back in our warehouse, we set up 10, for example, stations with two officials at each one who are not of the same party. And under these regulations, we would appoint those members of those teams a certain time frame prior to the actual audit happening. And there is also an audit review board, which is if those teams disagree on a particular mark, the intent of the voter, they would send it to a review board who would essentially make the final determination. And if they don't agree on the mark, for example, if it's a circle, it's half a circle, then it would be noted that there was no determination made, and it would be noted in the audit. For those officials to be appointed, I felt that it would give the staff more flexibility if the staff would receive those names from the political parties and recruit as many people as we can, because in these audits, we typically have to just basically send out requests to our local boards, to the public to help us to conduct these audits, because it does take a significant number of personnel. And I think that we agreed on that. There should be some flexibility. There should be more clear what is actually required from the board, such as selecting the contest, which is clearly something that the board should select in a public meeting, setting the risk limit, things to that nature, which are higher level things that the board would make a decision publicly. And I think that's something that we want to make changes to the existing document, but those are very minor. Overall, I was very pleased with the document. I was thankful to John and Common Cause, because I think that what's put together here is actually follows a lot of the processes that we have been following since 2020, and it codifies it, and it makes it clear for future elections, the actual process will be from beginning to end. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Miguel. Any questions of Miguel before we go on and hear from John? Okay, Ms. Marion?
Thank you, excuse me, Chairwoman, members of the board. Thank you, Miguel, for going through the history of that. I won't repeat any of that, and for the compliments. Yeah, as you know, I submitted this to the board last week. And just to give you very briefly, I based this when writing it on the Colorado regulations. So Colorado was the pioneer state. But as Miguel said, they do a very different type of audit because they're a primarily mail ballot state. So this would be really sort of the first regulations of any state in the country that deal with a state that is primarily a polling place election state. So, you know, I tried to adapt the language in those to Rhode Island, but also use some best practices that we're starting to see. So I had the opportunity to go to Georgia and Colorado and see risk limiting audits occur. And, you know, everybody does things a little differently. Rhode Island does a few things far better than those other states. You know, Georgia does some things far better than other states. So all of those practices are sort of incorporated in here so that we would be the model state. I just want to mention finally, you know, I saw, as Miguel said, you know, I shared with him in July, and he and Steve Taylor as well. I also shared, obviously, with verified voting, and many of you have met Mark Lindemann and Krista Laporte, who also works at verified voting. But there were a few other people who reviewed them, Monica Crane from the Carter Center, John McCarthy, who was part of that working group in 2019, Lynn Garland, who was part of that working group in 2019, Virginie Vanderroos from Voting Works, who makes the audit tool, Jennifer Morrell from the elections group, Kevin Skoglund from Citizens for Better Elections, as well as some local people. Steve Brown from the ACLU had a chance to provide input. Nick from the city of Cranston provided input, as well as your staff. So a lot of, I didn't even read the whole list, but like a lot of folks who have a lot of expertise in audits have taken a look at these and provided suggestions, and I've tried to incorporate all those the best I could. I'll finally say, Miguel reached out to me about his concerns about what the board would be doing versus what the staff would be doing. I agree 100%, totally willing to help draft some amendments that would reflect that. And consider, over the rulemaking period, if there are other ideas that the board staff or other interested people or organizations who submit comments, to consider trying to perfect these, because like I said, this is really kind of the first and most comprehensive regulations of its type. So
Thank you.
thank you.
Any questions? Yes, sir.
John, the Colorado, Michigan, and Georgia have the audits. Are there any other states that have audits?
Yeah, so there are a number of states that conduct risk limiting audits now. Some, it's just done in certain counties. So I can't name off the top of my head all the states, but yeah, we're starting to see more and more states. I'm trying to even think, like, I know Ohio's been doing them. North Carolina has done some. California used to do them. There's an effort to try to get them doing them again. So we're really seeing them spread across the states. While you were discussing another item, one of my colleagues sent me Pennsylvania. There's a bill, and an amendment was offered today to that bill that basically takes the Rhode Island risk limiting audit statute and offers as an amendment to a bill in Pennsylvania. So
Wow, that's great.
hard to, to overemphasize like Rhode Island's leadership on this. I should also just compliment Miguel. Last 2 weeks ago, testified in Massachusetts. There's a bill to do this in Massachusetts. I reached out to Miguel because they were looking for an expert to testify on it, an administrative expert, not an advocate. And he testified, so super grateful that he was able to share his expertise. But people do look to Rhode Island. There were 60 people here for those pilots.
I know the devil's in the details.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that you've looked at the rules and regs from at least the leading states, Colorado, Michigan, and Georgia. And I'm sure during the course of your education or gathering information on this, you have copies of those rules and regs. Would it be possible for you to share those with us?
Yeah, I'd be more than happy to share those.
Yeah, I'd like to see how other states approach this, because the rules are very detailed, extremely detailed. Exactly the time frame and people involved and the responsibility of members of the board to be there. So I don't know whether or not that we need additional help or how we're going to work the staff on this. Perhaps Miguel can explain that.
Well,
thought
I
about
think that underlies really the only concern that I had was that, we would need the flexibility to bring in staff to conduct the audit and to require the board, for example, to take an action to appoint review board members or audit board members. I thought that giving the staff the flexibility to bring in seasonal help, to bring in folks that the parties that the local boards of canvassers could help us with would give us a lot of flexibility to do that. And I think that's what the intent was in the regulation for the most part, because I think it does spell out when the board must make a decision. It's clear. And in other aspects, as far as posting stuff to the website, Obviously, that would not be the board. That was the agency would be fall under that responsibility. But I just needed a little bit more clarification, I think, of when the staff would be able to do certain activities and when the board would actually be required to, at a meeting of the board, to make certain decisions regarding the audit.
I remember the audit that I attended started off by getting a seed number. We had a 64 side cube. We all took turns throwing that out. What does the rule say about creating that seed number and how it goes about, how you go about doing it?
Yeah, the rule as proposed basically takes as you do it now and just puts it into regulation. So it would occur at a public meeting of the board, and members of the public would be invited up to participate. If there weren't enough members of the public, staff, board members could roll the die, and then it would be published on the website of the board before the audit begins. So those are all steps you take now. It would just put that into writing.
Would that seed number take place, drawing the seed number on the day of the audit?
I
Or the day before or 2 days before?
I believe it's required 2 days in this. We've done it usually the day before. We have not done it on the same day as the audit in general.
Yeah, and different jurisdictions handle it differently. Some do it on the day of, some do it in advance, depending usually on how hard it is to transport ballots and
But
things
I
like
was just
that.
curious why you would post it 2 days before the actual, 2 days before the audit.
Yeah, so you'll see as you read these, that there's a lot of emphasis on posting information before different steps occur. The idea of a risk limiting audit, like conceptually, is that a member of the public could access the information, including the ballot manifest, the random seed, even the code of the software, because it's open source software, and replicate the audit. And so it's the same idea behind in scientific experiments where now they publish the data set used for a scientific experiment. So another scientist can replicate the experiment to see if they get the same result. There are audit enthusiasts, we'll just say, who like to follow these things and will watch the live stream. One of them will text me throughout the live stream from Colorado, and he's taking the random seed, he's putting it into a generator, he's basically following all the steps to make sure that the audit is proceeding as it's supposed to, because the audit is really just a way to sort of mitigate threats to an election. And if you can transparently follow the audit, you can have faith that the election yielded the correct outcome. So, what you don't want is the audit occurs in the black box, and then you present the results of the audit and you say, trust the results. You want the public to be able to follow the audit as it goes along with all of the information the auditors have.
I understand that, but what happens if that person who's doing this on his own or her own?
Yeah.
And comes up with a different result? What is how do you approach that?
Yeah, that's never happened. In fact, theoretically, an audit can trigger a full manual tally. There's no jurisdiction in which a risk limiting audit has ever resulted in overturning the unofficial result. Eventually, there will be, right? Eventually, a machine will be programmed incorrectly or something will happen. The audit will catch it and it will lead to a full hand recount and it will yield the correct outcome for the election. But it hasn't happened yet. Realistically, like no one person could follow the audit, the entire audit, right? Because you have, as Miguel described, you have 10 teams auditing ballots. Theoretically, as envisioned in here, I as an observer can see how they're interpreting that ballot. And then I could create a separate tally and then I could follow the audit. Nobody's going to be running from table to table to table looking at all 10 sets of audit teams. I guess theoretically, we've never seen it. You could have a coordinated effort of observers, just like poll checkers, who basically are checking the audit. That could happen as written. That could happen under these rules, and they could come to their own conclusion of whether the audit worked correctly. There's no mechanism in the audit for a challenge. If one of the political parties wanted to challenge the results of the audit, there's no mechanism for challenging the results of the audit, but the political parties are involved in the audit because they can suggest the auditors.
But your rule says that the duties on the board to make sure that there's a public inspection of each of the ballots to determine whether or not it's a valid ballot or not. And you have 10 teams. How's that going to work? Because we, as the member of the board, not going to be there all the time, okay? But we don't want to violate our own rules. But if each of these ballots is not subject to a public inspection.
Well, they are publicly, that is occurring in public in the warehouse. It's roped off, but the public can approach those audit teams and watch them do that. You've delegated that to those audit
But you're
teams.
not requiring the audit team to hold up the ballot
No.
and show it.
Not
to the
hold
public,
it
right?
up, but it needs to be visible to the public as they're doing it.
But yeah, but we had I participated in the first audit,
Mhm.
okay, and the people were outside, but they couldn't see. Okay, it's sort of an impossibility to
Was
see
that during the
everything.
COVID?
No, this was the
No?
first audit
Oh,
that we had,
okay.
okay? Because we went through the batch, we did the hash marks and so forth, determined whether or not there was a proper ballot, properly marked ballot. So I was just curious on, you don't anticipate, that each and every ballot be subject to public inspection.
Yeah, I mean, theoretically, yeah, a person could stand behind or in front of the table, depending on how it's set up, and see, so I participated as well. So I would read, vote for candidate A. I would pass it to Miguel on my audit team. He would say, vote for candidate A or vote for candidate B. And the public could theoretically see that that's what the bubble.
As long as it's open, it's an open
Okay, thank you.
process. Yeah,
Yeah.
understood. Any other questions? Okay, what action would the board like to take? Do we want to make a motion to begin the rulemaking process for this?
Yeah, I'll make the motion that we commence the rulemaking process in the normal course and send it out for public comment.
Moved by Mr. D. Simone, seconded by Mrs. Johnson. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
both of you. Item number 10, the board may discuss and vote on the job description for an executive director for the Board of Elections due to the anticipated retirement of Executive Director Robert Raposa. So we have a couple of drafts in front of us. We also have the executive director draft that was used the last time we advertised for this position back in 2016. And I know that there has been some refinement of that by your staff, correct? But I don't know if the board would like to make any further modifications, and I guess that's where we start the conversation. Anyone like to speak on that? Ms. Bettenker.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Yeah, no, and I appreciate, and so some of the changes I wanted to make were specifically, some of them are here, and I appreciate that we had the copy of the Maryland copy. It's something I saw that I thought could help. Again, it's two different states, and I understand that. Some of the things that I definitely think that should be included, one of them is in a very brief sentence, but I think I wonder if we could expand it more. And it says, first, it's also, I would love if we could put this in bullet points, by the way. I'm so sorry. It's just really hard. Is that a pain in the butt? It's just
No.
really hard to read, and if that's okay, I'm
That's a
so
good
sorry.
suggestion, Yeah.
Yeah, it's really hard to follow. So one, if we could put them as bullet points, each sentence or duty, that would be incredibly helpful. Second, where it states, it says coordination of the agency media relations and public information campaigns through national and local media outlets and social media platforms. I really appreciate that. I think the Maryland one has a little bit of different wording around kind of being the public face to meet and having this media relations knowledge and access. I think that's a really important part that we need to underscore that I realized in the 2016 job description wasn't there. So I think having something that probably mirrors the one from Maryland would be really helpful.
Is that before you,
Yes.
that you'd like to read?
Yep.
Okay.
Give me 2 seconds. All right, sorry, there's many of them. Yes, so ability to respond to press inquiries from local, state, and national media with written statements and/or by interview. So that's in the last one, page 1 of the job description of Maryland. I think that is very concise, and I'm putting that up before all of you. I think it's very concise, very specific. I think it can really be very supportive to what the board, our executive director already does, and I think that could be really helpful. And then my second one, and this is sort of a question, I'm not sure if it's already integrated. So in the Maryland one, it talks about knowledge of cybersecurity policies as a governmental entity to participate in trainings and seminars. We just talked about cybersecurity, so I'm wondering if do you believe that that would be a pertinent thing to have as an executive director? I'm asking, I don't know if,
I think it is. I think it's something that we could include, and certainly it wasn't as much of a threat as it is now back in 2016.
So are you suggesting that that be one of the minimum qualifications, or are you suggesting
Yes,
that's
Commissioner.
something that the candidate could?
Have a certain amount of
Have
time.
it.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
like, so in the Maryland, when it sort of says knowledge, skills, and abilities, and I think that could be helpful. So I think if it's that knowledge or skill, I think that the candidate should have some knowledge of cybersecurity measures that we're doing, even our current Board of Elections and clerks and everyone else in the state and outside of those who will apply to the role when it's available. I think knowledge of some cybersecurity measures that are being taken. So I think maybe if we can narrow that down.
Okay. So that would be also in the first portion of this,
Yes,
where
ma'am.
we have the general statement of duties, responsibilities, and you're suggesting that be one of the bullets,
Yes,
perhaps?
ma'am.
Okay. Did you have
Um,
something?
Yeah, thank you,
Mrs.
Madam
Johnson?
Chair. I concur with Commissioner Bettenker's points. Particularly around the ability to, I think this is a good, concise statement. How it reads now is coordination of agency media relations, public information campaigns through national and local media outlets and social media platforms. I know we use outside PR communication support right now. I think that's a conversation we need to have about the future state. So I personally would like, I like the statement that Michigan, is it Maryland? Michigan, Maryland uses. And then again, to Commissioner Bettenker's point, I do, and this might take us on to, I would not suggest this be 5 or 6 pages, but might take us on to a second page if we're bulleting out. I like the wording of the knowledge, skills, and abilities versus the minimum qualifications. I mean, if we want to make the minimum college degree,
Rather than minimum qualifications, say knowledge, skills, and abilities.
I think so. That's my 2 cents.
Okay.
I think Commissioner Bettenker has something.
Yeah,
Oh,
I have
And
another.
you also like the bullet platform, you said, the bullet platform.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, you can go
No,
ahead.
no, no,
Thank
go
you.
ahead, please.
I have more of a clarification in the current and proposed draft. So it's at the bottom of the thing. It says responsible for writing manuals, booklets, informational, educational materials. So my question to the director is that something that solely falls on you, or is there another member of your team that can do it? I'm asking because I think in this Maryland one, it says like that you would oversee that.
Right.
Perfect. And so I think I'm wondering
So
if we can,
clarify it.
yes, so if we can clarify, because I think the idea of you solely, or the executive director being responsible for that sounds a little too much. I think you have an
Responsible
entire
for the-
team.
For the
For
oversight.
the oversight, yes, ma'am.
Got it.
And then the last one, I will back off, because you mentioned the college, that right now that we have the college degree and as well as a current certified election registration. So in the minimum requirements, it also, for the Maryland one, it sort of breaks down. So if the person doesn't have a college degree, they would need to have over 10 years of experience in management. This is sort of a question for all of you. Or the second, it would be if they have a bachelor's degree at a minimum of a certain amount of years managing a team, which I think is really important. Director, can you remind me how many people you oversee? Thank you. Thank you. So I think saying that has overseen at least a minimum of 5 humans would be great.
So you want that part of the experience?
Yeah, so you know how it, and again, this is sort of just throwing it to all of you to see what you think. Because it's under minimum qualifications, we have education and experience. And I don't think, and so I guess my question is to the rest of the commissioners is, would it make sense if we took a candidate that may not have a college degree? There's actually a large percentage of not only Rhode Islanders, but people in our country that do not have a college degree, or may not have finished their college degree. Nevertheless, they may have 10 years plus in experience, specifically when it comes to elections. So I think that's important to take into consideration. Or if they do have a college degree, I think it would also be important to say, and a minimum of X amount of years of management.
Okay. I think
That's
those
just
are-
a question
I
for the
think
rest.
those are probably good changes
Yeah.
we could
And
make.
it's also an equitable access to individuals that may not have a college degree, and it's an important thing to consider.
Yes. Mr. Schultz, you had something else you wanted to add?
Yes, last time we looked at the executive director, and we had a number of people who applied who really had no experience running an election. There are a few that had experience, but Bob will be leaving. We need somebody who can hit the road running, so to speak. So we should have a minimum qualification of somebody who's had some years of experience in running presidential and gubernatorial elections. The Maryland has that as minimum qualifications. Well, just read it, it says experience, 10 years of experience applying federal, state, and local election laws and regulations applicable to conducting elections from a managerial level, which must be included at least 2 presidential and 2 gubernatorial elections, and an additional 4 years of supervising management experience. Okay, I think that's an important.
So you would like it to be that specific then?
Yeah, I think Maryland has a good point there. That way we can focus in a small group of people who really have the experience to run this organization rather than go through hundreds of applicants who decide, hey, it's a job, let me apply for it. I think we should look at people who actually have the experience and who can actually run an election.
Are we saying it's preferred or it's required?
I think it should be required.
Well, so, and just to
What are the
clarify,
thoughts of the other members?
I'd say, well, for me personally, that on that point, and I agree with everything Commissioner Schultz said about the importance. I also believe that there is much you can learn, process and systems wide. And I want us to be able to look at candidates who can have a short learning curve, have all the transferable skills needed. So I'd be for that. I have a process question about this. Do we need a timeline to get this finalized? There's a lot of great suggestions happening in the past. I don't know who wrote this or how long was this written by the board in 2016 prior.
Yeah, good point.
Okay.
Good point, yes.
Okay. Okay.
Right, they have the current.
Okay.
Bob, can you turn your, I don't know if you're on.
On the minimum requirements, we wanted to add the 10 years of experience that we're discussing right now.
Well, I mean, I think that was a suggestion. I don't know that we voted on that yet.
We haven't voted on anything
No,
yet.
my
so-
thought was, were you planning on adding that to what is on the current or replacing?
Well,
Because I'm
I
making
was gonna
notes over here.
ask the chair a question because I
Okay.
wasn't here when you did this the last time.
I don't think we had much to do with,
Did you?
I mean, we may have seen the draft, but I don't think we,
But I guess, is the board going to have some type of a subcommittee that's going to be involved in the interviewing process as well? Because if so, maybe it makes sense to have a subcommittee right now to draft this and bring it back to the board.
I think that's an excellent suggestion. I know last time we did have a subcommittee of the board that did the interviews and made the recommendation to the full board. And it makes sense to
So
do
why-
that if they're also doing,
That's
The job
going to be my
description.
suggestion. That
I
maybe if we're
agree
going to
with
have
you.
a subcommittee, maybe appoint a subcommittee now, look this over, bring this back to the board, and then get the process
and
started.
we need a short window though. I mean,
Right.
this can't be something that we languish here.
Mhm.
No. And taking all of these suggestions and either implementing them or modifying them or, and then bringing that back to the board for a full
I mean,
approval.
that's just a suggestion. I don't know how
It's a
you did
good,
it the last
it's a
time.
good suggestion.
Is that a motion?
Sure, I'll make a motion that we have a subcommittee to draft the statement of duties, responsibilities, and along with the minimum qualifications of the proposed executive director.
So you have a motion. Do we have a second to that motion?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Jack Boney. Any further discussion?
I was wondering if the commissioner, we can put a timeline specifically on this?
Sure, well, I mean, I think we got to, when we appoint the subcommittee, then we're going
Okay,
to have a
beautiful,
subcommittee. And when we
perfect.
do the appointment, we'll set the timeline.
Thank you so much,
Because then
Commissioner.
maybe somebody won't want to serve on it if the timeline is too narrow.
That's very true.
So,
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous vote of this board.
so now I guess we need to move to actually establish the committee.
I think we do.
Get volunteers for the committee.
Yes, indeed. And Mr. DeSimone, it sounds like you would like to be part of that committee.
I don't need to be part of the committee. I just suggested that we have it. But I certainly would be
voluntold
part of the
other
committee
people.
if you want me to be. So,
I think with your experience, it would be a good idea for you to be part of the committee. Just my evaluation of it. And I think, I don't know who else would be interested in doing this. I know that, Mr. Scholes, you have a lot of experience
Yeah,
as well,
Yeah, I can participate.
and maybe one other member.
I would be happy to.
Someone's staring at her. Did
No,
you
I think
volunteer?
you could-
Who volunteered? Did you volunteer?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
So we have three who would be interested. Can we appoint four? Well, this would have to be an open meeting anyway, wouldn't it, Ray? So if anyone else is
So Ray,
interested-
even if we're not a quorum and we.
You would be if you have three members. The committee itself would be the quorum. That would be the body that would be open, subject to the OMA.
Yeah, I've actually asked that question myself before.
The clarification of the
Yes.
number, yeah.
So I don't know if anyone else would like to be part of it. Mr. Jack Boney, Mrs. Johnson.
We also have one member.
Yeah, that's what I was
Look at-
gonna say. I mean, I'm
Miss-
always
Commissioner
happy.
Jack Boney's like,
Well, we'll get a look
I'm
at
all-
it after anyway. And
Yeah.
be able to,
Yeah.
to make modifications if we
Yeah.
want to do that.
I'm certain
gonna
that the
s-
committee would be happy to hear some suggestions as well.
100%,
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. So I guess you get started as soon as possible.
Yeah, I mean, when do we think we can go?
Well, I was going to ask that question because I think at the very least, we need to set a meeting date in the future
Mhm.
for this purpose and also to discuss the personnel matter that we discussed earlier this afternoon. So I don't know if we want to come up with a date now.
would it, and I'm looking at the chairwoman and the director, would 2 weeks from now be great? Or, because Madam Chair, you're saying one meeting to have both discussions?
I think it makes sense if we're meeting. We might have a long one, but
To have the
Welcome.
subcommittee meet first.
Before.
if it's possible, if it's at all
I'm
possible.
amenable to whatever works best for everyone.
I mean, we can meet next week if you have any.
I'm happy to meet next week.
Are you away, Mr. Scholes?
Anytime before the 29th or 28th of
Oh, yeah,
October.
absolutely.
Yes. Okay.
So then we can plan a meeting on the 17th
17th is good.
For the committee?
for the board. No, you're saying that.
For the full
one-
board, I'm
yeah,
suggesting the subcommittee meet next week.
Next week.
On the 10th.
17th works for me.
Will we be meeting at 2 p.m.?
Who was on the subcommittee?
Oh, thank you.
Ray.
We have Mr. DeSimone,
Just the,
and we have Mr. Scholes and Ms.
Myself.
Bettenker.
did we want to inquire with Michael? I just want to be, I know he's not here today.
I'm happy
or
to
do
reach
we-
out to see if you would like
Okay.
to participate, but I think a three-member
I
team is
think
good.
it's good too. No, I'm fine with that too.
I'm sure that we're going to be here back.
The 10th or the 11th, depending on what you guys want to do.
Anytime.
Yeah, the 10th would be great, if
Okay,
that's
so
okay.
we'll let you work that
Yeah,
out.
2 o'clock or any day. I'm, my next.
2
my-
o'clock.
Yeah, 2 o'clock is okay.
2 o'clock will work for me. I have another meeting at 5, but I don't anticipate we're going to be long.
Okay.
I don't think so
And
either.
then the 17th at
Okay.
2 for the full board.
So you have some of the suggestions already made. I don't know
Yes,
if there are others that, if you're thinking of things you wanted to
Yeah,
tell
I mean,
that
and obviously,
subcommittee.
anybody can make any suggestions they want, either come there at next week or email them.
Or submit them.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Okay.
And then just to clarify, then 17th at 2 o'clock, full board meeting. Wonderful, thank you.
Does that work for you, Bob?
I won't be here on the 17th, but we will schedule a meeting. for
Thank you so
that
much,
day.
Bob.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So I think with that in place,
You know,
If there's any-
It's going to be the subcommittee.
subcommittee only.
We voted on the committee, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, okay.
You know what? I don't remember.
I
don't
know.
think we did, actually.
We did,
I-
we voted,
We
oh, we
voted to
voted,
have a
We said we
committee and
would
I
do it.
appointed
We'd have
who
a
was
Oh,
going to
yeah.
be on
we
the
voted to have
committee.
a committee.
Okay,
You want
so
me to-
I think now that we're done with that, I think we are finished with today's agenda, unless there's something else to be raised. We need a motion to adjourn this meeting.
so moved.
Moved by Mrs. Johnson, seconded by Ms. Bettenker. We are adjourned at 10 minutes to 6.
But we can get